All right, today I want to talk about package management within Neovim. And a lot of you guys probably use packer.nvim, but I want to talk about why that might not be the best decision, what I use, and sort of what a lot of the talk about in package management has been and some of my comments on it. So most of you guys probably use packer.nvim, and that makes sense because it's incredibly popular. It's written in Lua, and it utilizes the Vim8 package system, right? But honestly, I don't think that the Vim8 package system is all that great. I think that the one thing that is sort of its differentiating feature is also one of its like disadvantages, and that feature is the fact that it uses start and opt. And if you've never really looked into how it works, well, it's quite simple, right? So you have your data directory under .local/share/nvim/site, or rather /nvim, and then you enter your site directory, and then inside there you have pack, which is where the Vim8 pack system sort of resides. And within there, well, generally, actually, the way it's supposed to work is like if you have a package called foo, you're supposed to create a foo folder under pack, and then within there you would have different plugins that correspond to this one package, and those can sort of either load at default if you put it under a subfolder called start, or it can be loaded manually on demand if you put it under a folder called opt. And here in this example, you can see that there's like some code within here, and then there's also like some debug code, right? And that's opt because you don't want to load that all the time. But this is actually not all that useful because what ends up happening is most people just throw everything into start, right? Because opt is really annoying because you have to pack add manually to add those plugins and load them. And most of the time, you're just going to use start because you want it to load at some point anyway. And the additional disadvantage of using start is that you can get into stuff like this, right? You can't actually disable a plugin by commenting it out. Like this guy talks about here, if you comment out every plugin, you still have to run packer compile, although that's not really a problem because people have auto commands that run packer compile every time they save like their init.lua, right? But even if you do that, it's only going to disable plugins that are loaded in the opt folder and not the ones in start, because the plugins that get loaded, at least auto-loaded at start, only depends on where the plugin is like located physically in the directory, right? It's not based off of your configuration. It's not declarative in that matter, because as long as that plugin is within that folder, Vim is going to search through it and it's going to load it. So commenting it out is not going to do anything, which is why some people have reverted, things like make everything optional by default, that sort of thing. But that sort of just gets rid of the whole point, right? And there's not really that much of a benefit to using something like packer.nvim. Like all I've found is that it gets in the way more often than it helps you. So the alternative option, of course, there's really two main things you can do here. You can either use Vim8's package feature, or you do runtime path mangling, right? And effectively, runtime path mangling is sort of what Vim8 packages do, just less sophisticated, I guess. But it works just fine, right? And this is what things like vimplug do. You guys probably have all used vimplug at some point. Vimplug is sort of legendary, but it works very simply, right? It just takes your runtime path and it modifies it. So this is like just this huge list of paths that Vim will search through and load files from, right? Runtime files, blah, 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 blah. And the cool thing about this is that you can add your own paths to it. So this is perfect for a package manager because you can add like your own package directory and everything inside of there. You can configure to load, and you can, on top of that, as an additional layer, configure things like lazy loading, for example, right? So if you want like certain things to load when certain files are opened, etc., well, you can do that through your package manager. But I'll get to that in a second, why that isn't the best thing that you want to be doing anyway, and it's more related to, okay, it's not that related, but I think it's interesting to talk about. But the thing is, vimplug is written in Vim script, and although you can like, what's it called? I guess it's like shelling out to Vim script within Lua through like vim.command. I know this dude I14 who is writing Neopim. It's like definitely in pre-alpha. Well, actually, I'm not sure. It's viable. Yes. Well, he says it's pre-alpha, but like it sort of works already. Excuse me. So I use it for my management at least. I've used it for a long time. It's just that I haven't posted a video regarding my configurations since then when I switched. But it is very nice. Excuse me, it works in the way that Vim plug does, which is runtime path mangling. And all that means is like these plugins get put into a folder, and then Neopm will sort of add those folder paths to the runtime path so that everything gets loaded correctly. It's very simple. For the most part, the interface is very similar. The only difference is that if you comment out a plugin, it will actually disable the plugin, unlike with packer.nvim. Yeah, so that's Neopm. And just to give a very quick demonstration, I'm just going to install this plugin right now. So I'm going to create P here. And that P can be anything, right? It's the same thing with Packer. I think that should just work. So we just quit out. It's going to ask for us to install the plugin. Boom. Okay, I just want to test it. Yeah, okay, it works. So that's cool. That's really all there is that I want to talk about regarding like Neopm and stuff. But I did want to talk about lazy loading a bit more. And I know a lot of plugin managers pride themselves on like having advanced lazy loading features. Because I think like honestly that's one of like the only thing plugin managers can do to differentiate themselves. Because most of them have effectively the same interface and the same functionality. And honestly, I don't think lazy loading is the right responsibility for a package manager, right? There might be certain instances in where the orchestration of certain like plugins together may require some advanced lazy loading, but for the most part, I think that plugins should be responsible for managing their own lazy loading. So one of the most common types of lazy loading you're going to see is when you open a certain type of file, right? So like if I load a JavaScript file, if I load a JavaScript file, I open a buffer with JavaScript in it, and now I want like 5 different plugins to load up, right? So for those plugins, I'm going to put like 4 JavaScript. So when I hit a file type JavaScript, then I want to load the code for these plugins. But honestly, it's never that useful, because if these plugins were written correctly, these plugins themselves should have lazy loaded code. So when you write your lazy loaded like package manager configuration, you're not really saving the whole time that it would take to load up the entire code for those plugins. All you're doing is, well, you're not really delaying the time, but what you're doing is just like chipping off that tiny amount of time it would take for you to load the plugin, which would then immediately stop itself because it's not on a JavaScript file, right? So you're not saving the entire time that it would take to load the plugin, just the time for the plugin itself to realize that it should lazy load itself. And therefore, like it's such a minimal amount of time. And honestly, like Neovim loads instantaneously relative to other editors at least. So a lot of the lazy loading efforts I feel are like, first of all, misguided and also unnecessary. And the worst part is that a lot of times you have to break things in order to get good lazy loading. And like, okay, this is a horrible example, but like Neovim loads like instantaneously. I know things like tree sitter and LSP will slow it down. But honestly, like if you want Neovim to load fast, and it's a lot of the time it is noticeable, like when Neovim loads up slowly, especially like I know for Python, like the Python syntax file is like incredibly slow. And what I do is I just like suspend, right, and then use foreground. So like blah 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 hi, I'll hit Control Z, and like later I'll just hit FG to go back in. And I think that's honestly like a good way to go about it, because these lazy loading efforts are really only a bandage solution and they don't work, right? So that's all I had to really say. I haven't really been doing too much programming at all, so I haven't used Neovim that much, and I've also been using Emacs a lot. And like the Emacs lazy loading situation, like especially with Doom Emacs and stuff, is like a lot crazier. But yeah, so I just wanted to give a shout out to Neopm, shout out to II14. Honestly, like the thing with writing package managers is that you don't have access to like packages, right? You don't have access to plenary, which is probably really important. And that can make a big difference because you have to write a lot of the code again yourself, like stuff like this, where you have to like write tasks for like Git to run and etc. So I'm a big fan. I just wanted to like make it more like obvious what Vim8 packages were doing and like provide another option, right? Because I know a lot of people have probably fell into this exact same trap where they tried to comment out a plugin and it didn't work. So hope you guys enjoyed. See ya.